Today we're going to be focusing on the practicalities, the planning and the preparation involved in organising a field event. And I've scrolled through the pictures of people and who have joined us tonight, and I recognise some people who are extremely experienced trainers. So for you, this will probably be old hat, but that's okay because hopefully your knowledge and experience, you can share that with us in the discussion sections and with other people who might not have as much of a background as you. So we welcome you and we welcome input as well. So that's us. I'm going to hand over to Jen now to get us started.
Thank you very much, Matt. I'm just going to share my screen. Give me a second to get everything going. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming along to this webinar. As Matt says, there will be an interactive aspect to it. And we were thinking that after each section that we have identified as being important, we would open up the floor to some questions. It would be great if you were able to put any questions in the chat box so that we can preview those, or we can be thinking about those answers as we go along. And when we open up the floor, it would be good if you could put your hand up if you have anything in particular to say, but we want to keep those things brief and fairly short and sharp, please, so we don't overrun for the whole webinar. Thank you. As Matt said, the project that I'm working on in Northern Ireland is funded by the DERA, the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, and is primarily involved with expanding the remit of botanical training and involvement and recording in Northern Ireland. So, how do we go about planning and preparing and delivering training workshops, field events, field recording events, etc.? What do we need to consider for each aspect? So what type of field event will you be holding is, of course, the first really important question to ask. What level of botanical skill are you aiming to engage? And considerations when choosing a venue or site. Do you want this to be a completely accessible event, in which case, the condition of things like paths and etc. are, of course, incredibly important? Or is this going to be an upland site which is only really accessible to those who are fit enough to climb mountains? Is there any need to gain permission for access? Is it council land? So I know in Scotland it's you're free to roam. Unfortunately, that's not the same elsewhere in the UK. Here I have to do a sort of rather laboured application for access to use council forest parks and country parks and so on. So access permission is always important to think about. The facilities that will be at the site that you're going to, a lot of the time it's important to know whether there will be public toilets available and certainly car parking. Is the area, the site, the venue that you're interested in going to suitable for the event you're actually planning? Or is it going to have a reasonable amount of flora at that point in time? And is the kind of flora that's going to be there suitable for the type of event you want to run? I've already mentioned parking, but it's always important to know what sort of level of parking there's available, whether there's a cost involved, or whether car sharing might be an appropriate means of reducing the number of cars going to a venue. And any costs that there might be associated with parking, of course, as well as venue hire if needs be. So what type of event might you be wanting to run? There's lots of different things: general field events, looking at seasonal flowers or plants of a particular habitat, training field events which are taxa specific, especially things like rubus or taxus, taraxacum, I beg your pardon, etc. Those taxa which tend to be much more focused or and in need of specific sites? Or are you wanting to do a follow-on from a training workshop for sort of beginners in plant identification? In that case, you need a site which has got a really nice, diverse flora of things which aren't too difficult to key out. Or is there going to be a recording event where you're looking at things which are rare, haven't been recorded for the last 25 years, or in monads that haven't been recorded at all, or there are only very few records for? Or specific recording projects such as SHARP, LORE, IRPP, and NPMS. I'm afraid Matt would have to tell me what the SHARP, LORE, and IRPP means. NPMS is the National Plant Monitoring Scheme, which volunteers take on a 1 monad square and go back to it twice a year to record what is there at different levels of expertise. Or is it a hybrid workshop field event where you're doing an indoor workshop in the morning and then going out into the field to actually look at the things you've been talking about that morning? What level of botanical skill are you aiming to engage with? And the botanical skills ladder that is on the BSBI website is a really good way of dealing with that. It describes, this is just one page from the whole thing, from the leaflet, So You Want to Know Your Plants, which gives really clear and interesting descriptions of all the different levels that are in the botanical skills ladder. And they're really quite comprehensive and a really good resource for determining what level you want to produce a workshop or a training event or a field event for. And it's usually you end up doing something which maybe encompasses more than one level. So for example, sort of complete beginner's day might be aimed at people in 1 or 2, but you might still get people who are 3 because they just like the taxa that you're looking at. If you're going out to look at brambles or dandelions or alchemillas, then you're possibly dealing with people who are up at the 5 and 6 level of the scale. So it very much depends on what it is you're wanting to aim to. In putting together your details for your event, be clear about what botanical skills you think are required to make the most of the day. Reference the botanical skills ladder and either give a link to it in an email or attach a PDF to the email that you send out to your participants. It gives people a very clear idea of what is going to happen, so that they don't feel either bamboozled by the skill level that they weren't anticipating, or sold short because they thought it was something that was going to be a bit more high level. And using the numbers and descriptions from it allows for that continuation of clarity to the people who are booking on your event. The site for your event is very dependent, of course, on the type of event you want to run. As I've said, you might need to gain access permission from bodies like local councils who own country parks or forest parks nearby. How accessible is the area that you're interested in going to all levels of physical ability? Is the terrain going to require a certain level of fitness, or are you going to be mostly on fairly level ground and not particularly strenuous? Are there any alternatives available? For example, if there was poor weather conditions, or if the group size was larger than anticipated, or indeed smaller. Have you got a low altitude option instead of a high altitude? Should the cloud cover be very low? And having options for shorter versus longer field days as well. That level of preparation will really, will really stand you in good stead, and make the whole experience for you a great deal less stressful than it might be otherwise. Car parking capacity and the cost of the car parking can be an issue whenever it's a well-subscribed field event, but the space for parking cars is very limited. In which case, it would, suggesting that people car share is a really good way around of doing that, and getting the permission from those people to share their details, to sign up for the option to car share is a good way forward. Are there any public transport links to the area that you're going in, or at least close by where they could be picked up by other people with cars? Are there public toilets? Make it very clear if there aren't. A lot of people would be very unwilling and unable to go behind a bush, as a lot of our more seasoned botanists might be. So that can be quite an excluding factor in people going on field trips of whatever type. Is there a cost to the venue hire and resources if it's a training workshop? That's an important consideration, because you want to, if you do need to charge a fee, you need to think about how much that needs to be and whether or not it's going to be a tiered or a flat fee. If you run an official BSBI event versus an unofficial one, then you need to cover you would be covered by the insurance, the public liability insurance that the BSBI holds, but you would have to fulfill certain criteria to be fully covered by that. That includes completing a risk assessment and having that and sharing that with your participants. If you're having volunteers along, their understanding of GDPR would have to be ensured, as would safeguarding if you had any young people or vulnerable adults that were going to be involved in the day. There is a special consideration for hybrid training workshops, I think, in that you need to be sure that not only is the field event that you're planning suitable for the purposes of your event, but also is your indoors venue suitable for the indoor classroom session? Does it have good accessibility? If you're going to be trying to make a workshop or a training event accessible to all, then your indoor venue needs to be accessible too. Would the participants have easy access to toilets? Are there basic kitchen facilities so that you can make hot drinks and potentially warm something up in a microwave? Is there equipment to give a digital presentation of a PowerPoint like this? Or is it going to be all talking and looking into books, which is fine, but it's something you need to be prepared for initially. And I find that trying to do something quite for something like ferns identification for beginners without a PowerPoint presentation can make it slightly trickier, because you're not able to show and contrast in quite the same way as you would do initially, and you're much more dependent on having specimens to hand at the beginning of your workshop. So it's certainly worth a consideration if that is something that you're interested in doing. Ensuring that the seating and table capacity isn't too small or indeed too large. You sometimes are restricted as to what venues you can use, and you do end up in a vast hall with only 8 people. But that's okay. Not having enough room is possibly the worst scenario. And of course, being in close proximity, preferably walking distance, to good field sites and appropriate taxa. It isn't always necessary to be within walking distance. A short drive is possible, but it means that it's easier to come back to the indoor venue for a hot cup of tea or for your lunch or whatever, and also to come back with specimens to go through the keying process and to get used to using a key. So those are all really important things to consider. How much does it cost to hire the venue? is that going to be prohibitive in terms of any fee that you're going to charge your participants? If it's a flat fee, that's something worth considering. If it's an hourly charge, then you have the option of only hiring it for the few hours that you need in the morning, potentially, and thereby keeping the cost down as well. Will you need to charge a fee to the participants? I'm in the project I'm working on in Northern Ireland. I'm lucky enough to have a budget to hire venues, so if I don't need to charge a fee for the participants, then I don't necessarily have to. Any fee that I do tend to charge is for covering the resources that I'm giving to the participants, which are things like the FSC and fold-out laminated sheets. But if it's a higher amount, or you're bringing in a specialist to an expert in their field to do a more specialist training event, then the charges that any charge that you put on the participant has to be considered. And it's also important to think about whether you're going to have a flat fee or a tiered fee. A tiered fee would be maybe that they would be 50% off for BSBI members, for example, and or students. And it's sort of thinking that through, so making sure that you break even at least at the end of the event is important. I'm going to hand over to Matt now, and he is going to carry on with the presentation. I don't know how to. I have to stop.
Thank you, Jen.
No problem.
I think I'm back. Yes, apologies for that. We foolishly are not co-hosting, which means that I need Jen's permission to do anything, which, you know, seems reasonable. Great. Well, thanks, Jen. So I'm going to have a little chat about some of the pre-event planning, both what you do for participants and what you need back from participants. A little bit of overlap with what Jen said, I think, but no bad thing in some ways. And yeah, to start us off, proper planning prevents poor performance. Many of you will have inserted an extra line beginning with P into that, but that's not appropriate right now. Proper planning prevents poor performance. It really does. And next slide, please, Jen. Yeah, one of the key things that you as a leader can do and should be doing is a site recce, reconnoitering your site. Sometimes you can't do that. Sometimes it's not possible. Perhaps you might be leading a field meeting that's in a very remote area. Perhaps it's a multi-day thing and you're tramping into a bothy or something like that. In which case you have to use the tools at your disposal to do as much preparation as possible. So maps, aerial photography, information from people on the ground, that kind of thing. But let's just assume that we can get to our site. So first off, all on your site recce, you should be ticking over things like the access to the site. Is it driving only? Can we use public transport, like Jen says? If you're running an urban flora walk, a pavement plants event, started at a railway station. That way you've immediately ticked the car parking and the public transport boxes, if at all possible. What facilities are available? And then particularly important on your site recce is the safety considerations side of things, because this is the opportunity you have to find out whether there's phone reception, for example, what the terrain is really like. You can only learn so much from a map, what the paths are really like. Are there going to be any access issues during poor conditions? If you're in a more remote area, if you're at a coastal area, you should be thinking about tide times. If you're doing an adventurous meeting to a tidal island, which our wonderful Lothian Botany Group colleagues did last year, you know, that kind of preparation is super important. And all of this is part of the information that you'll be gathering to do your site-specific risk assessment. I'll mention a little bit more about those later. I personally, when I go to recce a site, I always plan for the worst. So you're looking for an alternative for a poor weather day. Maybe you can't get up in the hills to see the wonderful mountain flowers. What can you do instead? It's good practice to do that because you might find, despite all your best efforts to gather information on the participants you have coming, you might find that their fitness levels are very mixed. And you maybe have to rethink what you were hoping to do. Maybe a good idea to plan for that, have a second leader with a backup brief, and have an alternative, so you can split your group if necessary. Some people might have booked on and have lower fitness or might have some accessibility requirements, and if you can make it work for them, then you absolutely must. Yeah, it's not as hard as you might think if you're going to a low-level site or a site near a road or a country park or that kind of thing. So then on your site recce, planning the excursion route is the sort of next step. Jen, next slide, please. I keep pressing the button to move it on and nothing happens. There we go. So planning your route, planning what you're going to actually do with and on the site. It's a bit obvious, but I'll go through it anyway. First of all, is the location of your objectives, whether they're empty monads that you want to record plants in, rare plant populations you want to visit, or old records you're trying to re-find. You need to think out suitable walking routes to reach and to link these objectives. Doing a circuit is often, it makes a better day than a there and back. But having said that, we've all experienced that whole walking back the same way, finding new things. And you do, I reckon, miss maybe 20% of things going one way. So there's, yeah, it's not important, crucial, but it is useful, I think, to think about how you're going to link your day. I always like to think about the timing as I go around. So let's say you've arranged your meet to go from 10 till 4. If you've got 6 hours to play with, I'll be thinking where I want people to be at midday or for lunchtime, where I want people to be with an hour left before the meeting and going point. I want them to be able to stop what they're doing with an hour to go and get back to the start of the rendezvous. If you're running an event in a more remote area, Naismith's rule, you might have heard of that, is a very good mountain walking rule. It runs something on the lines of, it takes you an hour for every 3 miles you walk, plus an hour for every 2,000 feet of ascent. And I've changed it to modern money of 600 meters there. But of course, as botanists, you'll know that that is nonsense because you'll be stopping and looking at absolutely everything. So you can times it by at least 2. So always when you're thinking about the timing, building redundancy, it's really important to think about the route timing, because if you have a high level objective that's at the far end of your day, okay, you might be best off going to that first, walking past all of the exciting flora and the empty monads and whatever it is, and go there first, because only then will you know how much time you've got left and you can be adaptable on the day. And that will be much more satisfying for the people you've got with you than not quite making it to the, I don't know, alpine catchfly site or whatever it might be that they've driven hundreds of miles to come and see. Another thing I think about when I'm on my recce is the location of stops. They could just be lunch stops or rest stops, good places to put on your route. But if you're running a field training event, it's really useful to have a mental plan for where you're going to stop and demonstrate something. So, a nice population of a particular plant that you can use to talk about woodland flora or bogs or whatever it might be. And I tend to take a sort of, just in my notebook, have it scrolled down the little stops that I'm going to take. You can even put times on them so you can check it against your watch. Possibly over planning, but you get the picture. I mentioned about rendezvous points. Especially if you're in a more remote location, planning what to do if something goes wrong. is a really important element of this. And the route side of things is important here. So generally, if something goes wrong, it will go wrong at the worst possible place for it to go wrong. It will be as far away from the car park as you can. You will be on the worst ground, etc., etc., etc. But if you've already had a think about the way to get your group out of that place, the safest route back, the fastest route back, whatever it might be, if your group is split, a timed rendezvous point to meet up again, for example, so that if you meet people and they're not there, you know to call them and head off anything. It's probably they've just spent too long looking at Carex, whatever it might be, but you never know. So as you're going around, it's worth thinking, what do we do if something happens that isn't great? Next slide, please, Jen. Speaking of things happening that aren't great, risk assessments. I'm sure we've all done. Oh,
Sorry, Matt.
that's okay. I'm sure we've all done them, and there's a generic field meeting risk assessment form provided by BSBI for people. That's a formal risk assessment, and as Jen said, you need to complete that if you want your event to be an official BSBI event covered by BSBI insurance. But I think it's worth pointing out that informal risk assessments are just as important. Not necessarily the ones that you write down, but the ones you do as you're doing your site recce, looking for hazards. They're the things that will go into your site briefing at the start of the day, which you should definitely always do, whether it's a formal meeting or not. You should make people aware of the site, any likely hazards, usually slips, trips, and falls and falling in the water. Lyme's disease, something you should always mention. Earliest ticks, I think, in March. They've already started coming out, which is joyful. So yeah, formal versus informal risk assessment. I would use a risk assessment form personally for myself for any kind of event, even if it sits outside of the formal BSBI structure, as most local botany group events do. I just think it helps to concentrate the mind. It helps you feel more confident in your planning for the site. Yep, so site risk assessments must, and of course, should be site specific. There's no point just, taking one on that's for a completely different place. They ought to be dynamic as well. And what I mean by that is they're not just a piece of paper. A risk assessment should be changing as the conditions change. If you're up the hills and the cloud rolls in, your risk assessment has changed dramatically, especially if your group is split. Some people over there looking at the crag, some people there looking at the flush. You need to be able to make decisions on the hoof and change the level of risk in your mind and make decisions based on that. Yes, you should definitely share a formal risk assessment beforehand with everybody. But as I say, on the day, it's best to start off your event with a welcome briefing. And a part of that really needs to be a quick check through the hazards. One of the biggest hazards is, in fact, other people. If you're not working in remote areas, but if you're in a country park or whatever it might be, you need to be aware of other people who are there. You need to be aware of the impact that your activities can have on them as well. Because if you're just on a narrow path and there's 20 of you and they're trying to go for a walk, or the kids are cycling or whatever it might be, that's going to be a difficulty. And that's something to think about when you're route planning as well for your stops. I recently did a guided walk where I had a stop next to a beautiful road path verge full of varied flora, but there was no width to the path whatsoever. And of course, everybody needed to get past at that exact point. And so I was left feeling a little bit stupid as we did hokey cokey on and off the path. So if you can avoid that with good planning, then please do. Next slide, please, Jen. Another really important thing to think about before the event itself is the joining instructions. The crucial thing is to provide clear and precise directions to the site. Now, traditionally, that was a grid reference along with your meeting place and time, but the youth of today now uses a whole range of other things. online maps with Google Map links to the location. What 3 words, which is a thing that I only came across when I started up a local botany group and was lambasted because I wasn't using what 3 words. And of course, printing off maps or photocopying maps, whatever it is, to show people where they need to go. All of these things together, if in doubt, stick them all in like I've done on the bottom right there, where we've got the where are we meeting, the link, the what's 3 words, the grid reference, the maps. I haven't done the postcode, more fool me. In my journey instructions, I would also lay out the recording objectives and also equipment that people need to bring. So maybe next slide, please, Jen. Yes, so recording objectives, starting off, I think, with what to expect on the day. And it's really useful to explain to people before the event what kind of event it is. There are very different types of field meetings. There's training field meetings, there's recording field meetings, there's twitching a rare plant. And different people will want to do different things. So the clearer you are beforehand, the more likely everybody who's there is there for what you're preparing and giving to them. And so they're more likely to have a good time, and you're more likely to have a good time. It's a really good idea to spell out the limiting factors beforehand to people, so they can self-assess themselves as to how they'll find it. They may decide not to come, or may decide to split into an easier walk. The terrain, the planned route length and challenge, the expected length of the day. These are really important things to put in there, because if someone comes and they can't physically do it, you can then point to the joining instructions and say, well, we were very clear about what was involved. We're very sorry, but there it is. You also be great to cover some of the habitats and flora present. It doesn't have to be very detailed, but if people want to bone up on their salt marsh flora because they haven't been to a salt marsh for more than a year, it's great to know that that's there. A bit of expectation management might come in here. The picture at the bottom is the classic snow pearl where it's the gynonevalis shot, and the picture on the top is what it really looks like. At my fingertip there. So yeah, a bit of expectation management can be helpful. And then of course also you want to put out your recording or your teaching learning objectives for the day. Next slide, please, Jen. So very quickly, an excuse to put in a lovely picture of Saxifraga cespitosa, because who doesn't love that? Recording objectives, of course, there's loads of reasons you might want to run a field meeting. Location of previous or old records, checking habitats of interest for rare or scarce taxa, just general recording squares. But I think it's a very useful thing to do to explain this clearly beforehand in your joining instructions, because then people can get into the headspace needed. The recording approach, what resolution you're taking. Are you doing all the monads, or do you have just one target monad that you can share with people beforehand? Are you only wanting records of target species or priority species, or are you doing full species lists? Are you going into details about the population extent or the population size of a plant? Or are you just doing presence absence? And if you're running a field meeting around a particular survey type, like the MPMS, or in my case, the SHARP, the Scottish Hectare Rare Plant Project, have you got the survey-specific forms that you can share with people so they can prepare in advance and get into the headspace for the data that you're looking to collect? Next slide, please, Jen. Also important is the equipment list. And I think it's a really good principle to assume that everybody is a little forgetful when they come on one of these things. So yeah, just assume everybody is really, really, really forgetful. It's good to split equipment into essential versus optional. And the experience level of the attendees will often affect what it is they think to bring, which is another reason this is useful. And it's a good way to pick up on less experienced people. For example, at the start of your day, as part of your introduction, you can ask if anybody needs a hand lens because you brought some spares. If they've not got their own hand lens, chances are they're going to be less experienced. So you might want to alter how you do some things. You might want to do a little bit of one-on-one with them, or you might want to pair them up with another more experienced botanist that you already know. And that can really improve their experience and engage them. It's worth thinking about shared equipment, which I always assume that no one else is going to bring. So I always try and take at least one of this stuff: the first aid kits, the tick tweezers, the bivy bag for the disaster that you hope doesn't happen, GPSs, and so forth. If your group is planning to split up, or if you have a backup plan, you need to make sure that every leader in your group, in your subgroup, has access to those as well. So a bit of communication beforehand. Contact numbers is really important. Certainly each leader's contact number, but also I like to take a contact list for all the group and an emergency contact as well. Often you can't winkle that information out of people until on the day, but that's fine. Just print off one thing and get all of your potential subgroup leaders to photograph it, and away they go. And then finally, meet specific equipment. I mentioned hand lenses, field guides, another thing you might want to have in the back of the car that you can then dole out when you discover people are less experienced. Binoculars, grapnels, you get the gist. And finally, lunch. There's a good chance that people who aren't experienced coming on field meetings will assume there's a cafe, even if you tell them there's no cafe. However many times you tell them there's no cafe, lunch. And I usually sling in some like a thing of hot cross buns and a pack of chocolate bars as well for those emergency supplements, people who have forgotten their lunch, so that you're not then having a disaster and they can have a good time too. Next slide, Jen. Brilliant. So that was a quick run through your pre-event planning for the participants, but you also need some information from the participants. I mentioned mobile phone numbers. So very quickly, the what, why, and how of it all. This slide, oh, sorry, just gonna, there we go. So the Jen mentioned Alchemillas earlier. Just for information, what Mark Lines, the BSPI Alchemilla referee there, is looking at is Alchemilla sciura, the Cairnwell ladies' mantle, found at the Glenshee car park and nowhere else. So don't tread on it next time you go. Okay, thanks, Jen. Next one. Yes, so what do you need from the participants and why? You'll notice that I found words beginning with C for all of these, which took a little bit of time, but I hope it's not too artificial. You need their contact details, of course you do, for organisation and safety. You need mobile phone numbers for them, and I like to have an emergency contact for people as well. I don't demand it, but if, often the emergency contact is also on the same meeting. They'll be standing next to them. But it's helpful to have, I think, at least for your peace of mind. You need their consent, firstly, for sharing contact details with other leaders. You also might need consent for photography. And these are things that you can pick up quite easily in some of the planning. You need information on potential constraints, so personal details for them that might affect how you plan and you carry out your field meeting. Botanical skill level is one of them. If you're running a general recording meet and you have everybody from super botanist supremo down to never looked at a plant before, if you have that information, you can split your group, you can assign mentors, you can manage it in a much more effective way. So getting that information, even if it's not as fine-grained as a botanical skills ladder, if it's just new to botany, yeah, not too bad. I should be running that field meeting. What are you doing? Just that basic 1, 2, 3 is really helpful. And people don't like to self-assess, so you can make it a bit fun as well. Fitness level, relevant medical conditions is a tricky one. I think it kind of pushes at the edge of how much do you need to know this, but I would not worry about it too much if you're, somewhere where there's vehicle access. But if you're going out into the mountains, I do like to ask, um, do you feel there is anything relevant in your medical history that I should know about? And if they want to then share that information, they can. And of course, they need to consider the risks. You need to provide their risk assessment if you're doing a formal BSBI meeting, and you also need to provide the briefing to attendees on safety issues. Next one, Jen. So how to get this information? To be honest with you, there's lots of ways. The easiest way, I think, these days is an online form where people can check boxes. And I've demonstrated here my awesome field meeting. This is on the Google Forms thing. You don't need to subscribe or anything like that. I don't think it's quite very easy to set up. And you can put, multiple choice and whatsoever. So yes, a little bit of levity might help people to engage. It depends on the thing that you're doing. Of course, you can do it with an emailed form. You could do it or a questionnaire, and that's absolutely fine. People do that all the time. It can be very useful. But the online thing is very easy to set up, and you can share a link, and then you're not downloading attachments and all the rest of it. Next slide, Jen. Okay. Do you want to hand over? I think that's the end of my bit, or would you like me to carry on?
No, I'll do this bit. That's fine. You can always add to it if you need to. So checking on the day, it's important to do things like check the weather forecast. Is what you anticipated actually going to happen? And whenever you're sending out the sort of your joining details to the people coming along on your event, it's always a good idea to remind them to do the same things so they have appropriate clothing with them. As Matt has already said, ensuring that all leaders have the equipment they need for if you're splitting up the group into various parties, especially things like first aid kits. I like to carry spare hats, gloves, and a warm garment so that because there's always somebody who on a chilly day hasn't managed to bring those along. And something that I'm not especially always very good at, arriving at the site in good time so that you're the first one there, or certainly one of the first there to sort of to gather your participants together. I do think sometimes I should have a sort of an airport laminated sheet saying BSBI on it to make myself a little bit more obvious, but it tends to work out fine. Talk to your participants when they get there, especially if you're waiting for the people to arrive. Remind them of but once you've got everybody, remind them of the contents of the risk assessment. Ask what people are looking to get out of the day, what their experience is, etc. Doing that early on, as Matt has said, means that you can find out if you've got a high mixed skill level of people you have. If there's somebody who needs to borrow a hand lens for the day, it's quite possible that either that they haven't got one and therefore haven't had much experience at looking at plants. And if you do hand out hand lenses, show people how to use them. A lot of people are given a hand lens and proceed to use it in such a way that actually they don't get the full benefit of it. And the number of times I've had people I show them how to use a hand lens and then they look at something and go, wow, this sort of just opens up their experience to the fine detail and the beauty of the things that you're going to be looking at. And that's a fantastic thing to be doing for them. Also finding out who has seen that target species before, because having people who've seen it before, who have a search image in their head, can help in terms of finding things. So making the most of the skills you have in your group is, of course, a really important thing to be doing. Whether that's...
Sorry, Jen. I just wanted to say one thing about who's seen the target species before. Last year, we went on a sticky catchfly survey, and in West Perthshire, and there were lots of new botanists who had no experience of the plant, and someone who was cultivating them for conservation translocations brought along a load in pots, which was absolutely brilliant for breaking the ice, getting people's eyes in with the flowering and the non-flowering. So yeah, if you can, bring a potted plant. I don't know.
And as Matt has already said, do not forget your packed lunch, and that's both you as the leader and also your participants having a few emergency supplies in your rucksack can make the difference between somebody having a miserable day and somebody having a good day. I think it's back over to you now, Matt.
Yep. So just a couple of other things to think about is how long is it going to take you to get there? If it's more than 2 hours, then you might want to travel the day before and stay overnight. This might not be a problem for some people, but certainly here in Scotland, if I want to lead a field meeting almost anywhere that isn't Stirlingshire, then then this is something that you need to think about. If you're out in the remote areas, having a power bank with you to help with your phone battery might be really important, especially if you're one of these people that uses the GPS on your phone, or if you started to use a recording app like the BSBI recording app. Something I didn't mention actually is how are you going to actually do the recording on your field meeting? And there's good traditionally people printed off recording sheets for the local vice county, and some people still do, but a lot of botanists don't use them anymore. So there's a lot of people are using recording apps of one form or another to gather the data. A lot of people like me like a little black notebook that they can drop in a river and fish out again, and it's still okay. So you need a little plan as to, it doesn't matter if people are gathering data a different way, as long as you can pull it all together again afterwards. I think it's much better to get people to record in a way that they're familiar with and confident with than to say, oh, I need you to do this recording sheet. But it depends on your field meeting. Just think about it first. And the kind of the overarching thing is always try and always have as your leading principle maintaining safety not only of the attendees but of yourself as well. Don't get pushed out of what is your comfortable zone by trying to, I don't know, deliver a more dramatic experience for someone. Don't be afraid to say no. We don't have time to do that. We can't go over that next rise to look for the next plant. Maintain the safety and well-being of you and the group. Next slide, Jen. So yeah, we've done the pre, we've done the during, now post-event, a little just very quickly looking at signposting and feedback. At the end of your day, if at all possible, pull people together and talk through, have a little debrief. If you split into groups, get people to feed back from their group. What was the coolest thing they found? What are they most envious of? How many records did they make? Quick tally up over a cup of tea in the cafe or whatever it might be. And this is a great opportunity to thank everybody for what they've done. People have often come a long way to contribute to these meetings. And as you will know better than I, the people who come are not just taking knowledge and experiences, they're giving it too. They're making the event a success by engaging, sharing their knowledge with other people on the group. It's a really good opportunity to signpost to other events or to other training opportunities. As you've gone around, if someone's expressing an interest in a particular group of plants, you can say, well, did you know BSBI is running a sedges or grasses training event or whatever it might be. You can signpost to resources, you can signpost to Faith Anstey's wonderful books. In fact, I can't see Faith on screen now, but she's there somewhere. It's a good opportunity then at the end to arrange how people are going to submit the data. I've mentioned lots of different data pathways. You can just say, well, look, I'll share a spreadsheet for pro forma with you and you can enter it there, or you can give me your recording cards or whatever it might be. Doesn't matter so long as you know it and they know it and it's all under control. Yet once you've actually left the field meeting site, It's really good to do a follow-up with people, sharing the data. I like to share the full data list because botanists being botanists, they like to have a poke around, especially if the group divided. I always look to see what the other group saw and found. Were we gazumped or not? It's nice to, in the email attached, with that attached, you can highlight the most valuable records, which refines were made after 20 plus years, etc. What was a new hectare record? Fairly standard stuff, but definitely worth taking the time to have a look through the database or whatever it might be to get that information. It inspires people to come again, and it inspires people to do their own recording. They realize, oh, that wasn't so hard. We went for a walk, and oh, we found a new hectare record. Maybe I could do that too. Gathering feedback on the event from the attendees is really important. Traditionally, we've often had a feedback form at the end, often from workshops, we have a feedback form at the end, and that works well in an indoor workshop scenario. But if you're standing in the rain in a car park, last thing you want to be doing is filling in a feedback form. So another of those little online forms that I mentioned is a really good opportunity. It's just sending a simple link, and then you don't get a cascade of emails into your inbox as well that you have to go through, or lose the feedback forms, as I did recently for someone else's event, which was very worrying until I found them again. Once you've gathered that feedback, it's really important to review it and to have an honest chat with yourself about what went well and what you would do differently next time around. It's really, really important not to feel bad about the one or two things that you could have done better, because you've just run a field meeting for God knows how many people. You've introduced lots of people to a wonderful site. You've shared your knowledge with them. If one or two things didn't go right, do not beat yourself up about it. It's never perfect. And the more you do this kind of thing, the less often those things happen. Sometimes things just go wrong. Sometimes someone comes on the group and they have a spiky personality and you have to work around it. Sometimes someone is taken ill and you have to just tear up your plan for the day. Don't worry about it. Just treat it as a learning exercise. Look at what you can control and what you can plan for, and review, and build that into your next one. Don't be put off. If you're a first-time leader and it doesn't go perfectly, doesn't matter. You've done amazingly, and we want you to continue, because it's people running these field meetings and sharing their knowledge that really, pass on the skills and keep BSBI going, I think. Debriefing other leaders as well is really, really important. So if you had the co-leaders or you split up, bring them into the circle and share the feedback with them, but be positive. And next slide, Jen. And yes, just to finish off, many of you won't need this, I'm sure, but if you're new to running field meetings, as just a few pointers for you to have a look at. There's the Be Adventure Smart website, which is quite a useful site for someone who's putting a toe into the water, I think, for running these things. Lots of different weather forecasting services. If you're in Scotland, England, or Wales, I think MWIS is the best Mountain Weather Information Service. Yeah, but I'm not sure what the equivalent is in Ireland. Jen, is there an equivalent?
Not that I'm aware of, but that doesn't mean anything, to be honest. Yeah, I need to find out. Yeah.
No worries. And yeah, BSBI do have an awful lot of information available, albeit buried a little bit in the members area of our website. So if you are a BSBI member, there's a members area. You pop in the password, which all members should know, but if you don't, email one of us. There's a new BSBI Vice County Recorder Resources page. Don't be put off by that if you're not a Vice County Recorder, because on there is a whole suite of different things, bits of guidance, links to policies and health and safety and all that exciting stuff that you might feel like you want to go through. There's also this Leaders Guidance 2025 PDF, which is basically everything we've said, but a whole lot more, running to I don't know how many pages. You can certainly run a field meeting without it, but it's a useful drawing together of a whole lot of information, and that's where you can find the risk assessment pro forma as well, which I think is a useful thing to have. And if you want to, if you do want to run a BSBI field meeting that is covered under the BSBI insurance, there's a document on there that you can search out that lays down exactly what is needed for that to be officially done. I think that's it from me.
So I think that's it from both of us, actually, Matt. So just to say thank you very much, everybody, for coming along to this evening's webinar. I'm just having a look in the chat. If anybody's got any specific questions, please put them in the chat just now. Thank you very much for your thanks and compliments, everybody. It's been really appreciated. And I hope you all have a fantastic season of recording and getting out in the field, and hopefully some of you will think about leading a group as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to say, I'm going to pop my email address in the chat just now. So if anybody wants to follow up on anything, they can do. I can't type and talk at the same time. Sorry. Someone's just asked, can we access this afterwards? Over to you, Jen.
Yes, this the webinar, the recording of this webinar will be put up on the BSBI YouTube channel in the next day or so. And as somebody who's registered for it, you'll get an email whenever that's happened. So I'm really glad that you feel it's a good resource for referencing in the future. Thank you very much, Adam and Aileen, for those comments. That's great.
And the PowerPoint links, will they be? There'll be a clickable or.
So the links that are in the PowerPoint will be in the comment section of the YouTube recording.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. I think unless anybody's got a specific question to ask. No, I don't think so.
We'll wish you all a very good night then. And thank you so much for joining us.
Indeed. Thank you all and take care. Bye.